Hello folks, I am Rahul. I am a professional scientific software developer by day during the week. Let's talk after the talk if you guys want to know what a scientific software developer is. And on weekends, I am an amateur tech policy person. I've been for the last couple of months now. First of all, I'll just jump to the thank you section. I want to thank you, FOSS United and the Takshashila Institution. Takshashila Institution runs a 3-month-long weekend public policy course, specifically a course on technology and policy. And FOSS United funded me to do this course as part of a cohort of 5 people. This is one of the reasons why I'm here in front of you talking about tech policy. So a huge shout out to both of those. Again, talk to me about Takshashila Institution, the tech policy course and whatnot after we are done with the talk. So jumping right into it, what is the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill of 2022? How many of you have read this bill? How many of you have read about this bill in a newspaper or a post somewhere? How many of you have read the policy analysis of this bill, maybe again, like by some organizations? Brilliant. So there are a few people here who have, and there's a few people who haven't. So first of all, let's talk about why we should read it in the first place. For me, one of the best reasons to read it is because it is small. It's 24 pages long. It is accessible to most people, if not all people, even if you don't have a background in public policy. It has an impact on everybody here. All of us will be impacted if this bill becomes law, because it deals with our personal data, our digital personal data. And not only does it impact us directly, it also impacts the companies that we work for, right? Because, for example, I'm going to do a callback. Mr. Amog gave a callback to Ashish regarding WebRTC. I want to give a callback to Mr. Amog because ID5 deals with digital personal data. And I hope ID5 actually gave comments on the bill, because if the bill becomes law, any professional company which deals with digital personal data will be impacted by this bill. And the other thing is, I want all of us to skim this bill so that we can form some opinions on it. And then we can go back and look at what the actual commentary is that people who know policy, people who do policy on a day-to-day basis have provided, right? Because we can form a basic opinion based on a few minutes of reading the bill, and then we can go back and look at what the professionals are saying about this bill. I want to be clear about what we are not going to talk about. We are not going to talk about what the policy gets right. We are not going to talk about what is wrong in the policy. We will not talk about what is missing in the policy. And I'm not going to do a policy analysis of what is in front of us. For that, please refer to some of those foundations which I've mentioned here: Internet Freedom Foundation, Software Freedom Law Center, the Indian chapter, FOSS United, eGov Foundation. There's a lot of people who have put forward commentary on this bill, and that is probably the best place to go and look at after the talk is done. So, also, as we read the bill, I want us to keep a few things in mind. So, the main things are, we want to identify the key actors in this bill. And then we want to talk about what the interactions between the actors are. And finally, we want to look at the costs and benefits. One nice thing for me would be, if you, when we are reading the bill, if you see something where you realize that this is going to be a cost or this is going to be a benefit, I would be perfectly happy if you just shout out loud cost. Okay? Can somebody just do that right now? This cost.
Cost.
Benefit. Awesome. If you see something, if you read something where you feel like this is going to be a cost on an individual or this is going to be a cost on a company, I want us to keep track of it. Because at the end of the day, all bills are going to be that. Every bill is going to put certain costs and provide certain benefits. And it's very important to identify those things. So let's just jump right into it. So there are 3 key actors that the bill talks about. There are data principals, there are data fiduciaries, and there is the data board. So data principals are you and I. All of us are data principals. The data principals are the people who actually who the digital personal data refers to. There are data fiduciaries. There's a few people, I think, from the finance background. How many of you know what a fiduciary is? Brilliant. There's a few people who know about it. So a fiduciary is somebody who is expected to work towards the best interests of the person whose information they're holding on to. That's a very vague explanation. Please go back and look it up. So there are data fiduciaries. Data fiduciary is any company which is asking for your personal data. That's what a data fiduciary is. And then there's a data board. Data board is the government authority which is going to regulate all of these things. So what are the basic interactions? The data fiduciary, which is the company, needs to give a notice to me, to the data principal, asking for information. And me, the data principal, needs to give them consent. I need to consent to them collecting my personal data. The data fiduciary needs to report any personal data breaches to the data board, which is the government authority. The data board can then decide to levy fines on the data fiduciary.
Cost and benefit.
Brilliant. Finally, the data principal can lodge complaints with the data board about a certain data fiduciary. I can complain about a company not handling my data well. And the data board can actually levy fines on me as well. If I report incomplete personal data, if I report false data, then the data board can penalize me as well. Cost and benefit. Awesome.
Who the cost is for?
There are costs and benefits involved. So let's just jump right into it. So if you want to go back and read this bill, how would you go about searching for it? Google, right? That is pretty much what this is. All I've done is opened the bill on Google, taken screenshots, thrown it in here. I want you guys to be as close to the actual bill as possible, which is why we are going to look at the actual PDF of the bill. And we are going to read exactly what is in the bill. So read is actually a stretch. We do not have time to read all 24 pages thoroughly. So we are going to skim through it. We are going to skim through, and I'll try to point out all the important parts of the bill. So let's jump right into it. There's a bunch of introduction, some information about what is in the bill, and so on and so forth. Damn, I can't read things easily. So the very first important thing in here is what the definitions are. So what is automated collection or automated processing? They have defined that. There's definitions of what data actually means. There's definitions of what a data fiduciary, a data principal, and a data processor are. And most importantly, there's definitions on what a person means. So whenever the bill talks about a person, they're not just talking about an individual, they're also talking about a company. So whenever they say a person is liable for this or a person is expected to do this, just keep that in mind that they're not only talking about an individual, they're also talking about companies. And then finally, personal data. What does personal data mean? Can anyone give examples of what personal data is? Aadhaar. Anything else? I'm sorry? Birthday. Okay. Is that uniquely identifiable for you? No, right? Other people have the same birthday. Anybody else? Somebody said fingerprints. Awesome. That's a digital personal data for you specifically. Somebody said passwords. I'm sorry? Driving license. That's a digital personal data. Anything else? Mobile number. Yeah, sure. It's uniquely identifiable for you. I'm sorry?
Your address.
Address. Sure. Temporarily it works because you might keep moving. Can people give me examples of what feel like personal data but are not actually personal data? I'm sorry? Birthday. Yeah, sure. That's right. Anything else? Browser history. Sure, that's not really, that's close but not really that. So please keep that in mind, because when we're talking about digital personal data in the bill, we're talking about data which is which can be used to directly identify you. Specifically you. We are not talking about information which could be used altogether to maybe identify you. We are being very specific. And that is very important. Any bill worth its salt is going to be very specific about what is in the bill. You cannot have a vague bill. Moving on, there are interpretations. How many of you know what the 8th schedule to the Constitution of India is? I didn't know it either. It basically says that there's no one official language in India. There are many different official languages in India, and the bill specifically says that the companies have to provide the notices or any information if requested in all of these languages.
Cost.
Awesome. The other interesting thing about this bill is this is the very first bill where the pronouns he or she are used throughout the bill. Because more often than not, we read a bill and it just says he is doing this, he is supposed to do that, they are supposed to do this, etc., etc. So this is the first time that the government of India has introduced a bill in this way. Finally, we now get to the meat of it, the application of this act. So this act applies to personal data collected from data principals online or personal data collected offline and digitized. Again, they're being careful to ensure that doesn't matter how the personal data ends up being digitized, it should be under the purview of this act.
Benefit.
And the cost, because you have to digitize, and whatever digitization you're doing, you have to keep track of it.
So that's a cost you're doing anyway.
Fair enough.
Right?
You're right.
Now it's a benefit that you have more broad coverage.
Fair
over
enough.
data.
Absolutely. The other interesting thing is the provisions of this act shall apply. Again, it sucks that you can't read exactly what is on the page. But the provisions of this act shall also apply to processing of data outside the territory of India.
Cost.
So how many of you know about this concept of data sovereignty? So data sovereignty, what they're trying to say is that if the data is about a person of Indian origin, if the data belongs to a sovereign of the Indian nation, then that data has to be under the purview of Indian laws. Doesn't matter where that data is being processed. So data sovereignty in general is a concept which is growing more and more popular around the world, and this bill again codifies the fact that doesn't matter where Indian personal data is being processed, it has to be under the purview of our laws, this law. Is that better?
Yes, much
Yeah?
better.
Okay. So the next thing is the notice. Like I said, the company has to give me a notice, I have to give them consent. So the company has to give me an itemized notice in clear and plain language containing the description of personal data being collected. Right? Does this sound familiar to what we already do? Yeah?
Isn't that kind of contradictory? Because the bill specifically says they have to give a specific notice to you.
Yeah.
How are they going to give specific notice to you without collecting some personal information already to be able to give notice to you?
Okay, so I think I did not read it in that way, because my understanding was they have to give a specific notice to you in the sense that they have to tell you exactly what they're collecting from you. So if you are going to open a bank account, they have to tell you exactly what all information they're collecting from you. So they have to give an itemized notice of I'm collecting your date of birth, I'm collecting your address, I'm collecting your KYC information, etc., etc. The next thing is the personal data of the data principal collected by the data fiduciary. Yeah. So if there's already digital personal data collected by a company before this bill goes into law, then the companies are still expected to tell me what all digital personal data they have about me. They can't simply say, oh, we collected it before this.
Cost.
Awesome. So they can't simply say, oh, only after the bill comes into law will we have to start worrying about this. No, any digital personal data that any company has about you, they have to tell you if this bill becomes law, what all information they have about you. One other really interesting thing about the bill is, at least that I found, these illustrations, they are very good ways of actually communicating the various legalities in the bill. So they walk you through basic examples of if you do this, then you have to do that, then you have to do that. Jumping forward, it's very important that I should be able to withdraw my consent anytime I want, but at the same time, the companies can tell me that they will stop providing me services if I withdraw consent, right? If I tell a bank that I withdraw my consent to KYC, the bank can tell me we will stop providing you banking services. That is understandable. And the other thing that the bill says is, if after I withdraw consent, then the company has to delete any personal data that they have of mine within a certain time period. Because why do they have to keep that information with them once I've stopped using that service?
Cost.
One other thing that the bill introduces is this concept of a consent manager. For the purpose, a consent manager basically is I should be able to use an application called a consent manager to be able to review any consent that I provided to any data fiduciary. This is again a cost, and this is going to spin up a whole new industry of software products which are trying to be a consent manager, because I want to be able to go to a single location where I can review all the consents I've provided to any online fiduciary. And this again is a very important thing. The performance of any contract already concluded shall not be made conditional on the consent of any new personal data, right? So for example, I've opened an account on some bank. The bank can then come back and tell me, you know what, I'll actually not let you use the app if you don't provide location every single time. How many of you have experienced this? Why? Why does the bank need my location? Right? So the bank cannot initially not tell me that they want my location and then later on come to me and tell me that, oh hey, you're not giving us location, we will not give you access to the services. And there's a whole bunch of information here that I'm going to completely skip on deemed consent. Deemed consent is another thing which people have hotly written about. It's not something that, it's not seen in a positive way. A whole bunch of information here. General obligations of data fiduciary. This is again the costs on the data fiduciary now. A data fiduciary has to make reasonable efforts to ensure that the data is accurate and complete. They have to ensure that whatever data they have collected about me is accurate and complete, especially if they're going to use it to make decisions that will affect me. This is going to be another major cost, because they can't simply act and make decisions about something without having full information about me. If they suffer a personal data breach, then they have to report this information to the board and to me as well. How many of you have suffered data breaches in the last 4 or 5 years? How many of you learned about this from random online services and not from the company itself? Right? So this is another cost, but this is a huge benefit for people. I do not want to hear about my loss of personal data from some other random service when my data gets exposed on the dark web. I'm actually going to jump all the way to the end now because we do not have the time. The only other important thing is a significant data fiduciary. So for example, ID5 is a company which I think might be a significant data fiduciary because the volume and sensitivity of personal data that they process is very, very important and it's very critical. Similarly, the risk of harm to a data principal if there is a data breach is very high. So significant data fiduciaries have even additional costs. So for example, they will have to have an independent data auditor who ensures that they are complying with the act. They will have to do data protection impact assessments and periodic audits to be able to ensure that they are adhering to whatever is in the bill and they are doing things in the best interest of the data principals. Awesome. We now have information about the data principal. There's a bunch of benefits that you have, mainly which are that you can correct and erase personal data that you have. You should be able to get information about through these consent managers, all the companies which have your personal data and so on. I'm skipping huge chunks here. The main thing is the data board. The data board is going to be appointed by the government to ensure that companies are handling things correctly. But we can talk after the talk is over. Who should be on the board? How do you elect?
Benefit depends entirely on this part.
Awesome. because we need people who are actual technologists, but also who understand policy and the costs and benefits of these policies. It is very important to ensure that people who are competent are on the board, but at the same time, we can't have companies who have effectively overtaken the board, because the companies can then say, it's okay, we have somebody on the board, they are not going to rule heavily on us. I'm going to jump right to the end now. Yeah, I'm done. These are the penalties that the bill says. The main thing I want to concentrate on, the funny thing is non-compliance with section 16 of this act, penalty of 10,000. Does anybody want to guess what that is?
Filing a false report.
Awesome. Filing false information specifically. So if you file false information, you will be fined 10,000 rupees. But the main thing is the failure of a data processor or a data fiduciary to take reasonable security safeguards, that can get fined up to 250 crores. This is the last thing. Is that enough? Is 250 crores enough of a cost to prevent a company from not being lax? Depends on what?
It entirely depends on the company.
Depends on the company. What about the company? Scale of the operations. Why is that not in there?
Scale, situation, there's
Right?
a whole lot of variables there.
So if we have a huge MNC which is earning a lot, and if you put the penalty as a maximum of 250 crores, they might just say 250 crores is the cost of doing business. Right?
But is that 250 crores per incident?
It's not necessarily per incident.
Now they haven't specified.
I'm going to stop here. I've gone way over time, like I did the last time I gave this talk. The slides are available on my page. If you go to the MumbaiFOSS schedule, you'll be able to get the slides from there. Thank you.